All right, let's see if we can do this in 30 seconds. If you shopped around for chronographs, you'll likely know there are a lot out there on the market, coming in a range of prices, sizes, and specialties. To help you cut through the noise and save you some time, we've organized this list into 10 categories. You're not gonna like every watch on the list, but there will be one or two that resonate with you. You may want a chronograph to time how long your pasta's been boiling. You may want to see how quickly you can get through airport security, or you just may like the way they look. We've got 10 categories on the agenda. Let's start with watch number 1. Remember to subscribe to our channel, and let's do a quick wrist check before we begin. I'm wearing my Swatch SCB 100 Black Friday chronograph from 1991. Swatch released a line of 6 37mm chronographs in the early 1990s. You'll notice the subdial layout is the same as the Moon Swatch, not a coincidence. This one has nicely aged tritium hands and hour markers, which is funny for a plastic watch. And I somehow found it in completely unworn condition in the box with the price tag still attached. It's not much to brag about, but it makes me smile. We're starting with a category of best dressed chronograph. And this is a tricky balance to find. Most chronographs were designed for the racetrack or the cockpit, but very few were designed to be office appropriate. However, there are options out there. I'll tell you what's considered the go-to option and then throw in some alternatives, including affordable options. Perhaps the most popular choice, and for good reason, is the IWC Portuguese chronograph. The dial is clean and classic with a very minimal bezel. The pump pushers aren't as dressy as our next options, but they're a solid historical touch and fun to use. You've got a wide range of dial colors, and cases hover between 40 and 42 millimeters. Prices for these start around $3,500. As an alternative to the Portuguese, might I suggest the Zenith Elite Chronograph Classic. The in-house El Primero movement has been modified for a 2-register setup, and to make the watch even more dressy, there's no date window. At 42 millimeters in diameter with long lugs, they don't wear small, but they come in under 12 millimeters thick, which is rare for a chronograph, and they have that minimal elegance of a dress watch. The dial heel is really sharp without doing too much. Gold versions sell around for $9,000, but steel versions sell for about half that. The Girard-Perregaux Richeville is worth a quick mention. It's powered by a Lemania movement, similar to the base movement for the Omega Speedmaster, and with a lug-to-lug of 45 millimeters, it wears compact, even on smaller wrists. We have a separate section on chronographs for smaller wrists coming up later on. For more affordable dress chronographs, Longines is going to be your best bet. To find the full range of these, type in Longines Heritage or Longines Master Collection into the search bar and filter by chronographs. You'll find plenty of contenders with decidedly classic aesthetic choices in the $2,000 to $4,000 range. There are also so many styles out there that you can get really specific about how busy versus how clean you'd like the dial to be. Finally, for really affordable dress chronographs, check out micro brands like Baltic. They got vintage appeal with modern mechanical movements for under $1,000. Now, most people prefer something sporty when shopping for a chronograph, but the great thing about these dressier options is that they could be the only watch you ever need. Our next category is the best Seiko chronograph. There's a key vintage Seiko we'll talk about later on, so we'll focus on modern examples for now. We'll give a nod to the Presage line of chronographs to start, because balancing Breguet numerals, and in some cases enamel dials, with chronograph subdials is not an easy thing to do, especially on a budget. These are nicely executed, although they run large at 42 millimeters wide by 15 millimeters thick. Now, your best bet when it comes to modern Seiko chronographs is the speed timer. There are plenty of quartz and solar options, but the best examples are the automatics, with an emphasis on the 2-register examples. As you'd expect from Seiko, there's a ton of detail here to sink your teeth into. The watch comes in a range of colors, and my personal favorite is the black and orange SBEC 019. Every time I see this watch, it reminds me of the movie Drive, starring Ryan Gosling. Honestly, I'd sell a watch to buy one of those scorpion jackets. But we're getting off topic. Creedor, Seiko's sister brand, also made some attractive models with sculpted bezels and integrated bracelets. These are great if you like the value proposition of a Seiko watch, but want something a little outside the norm. When it comes to the best automatic chronograph, the world's your oyster, as they say. If you go to Chrono24 and filter for automatic and chronograph, with a $10,000 limit, you'll have more results than you could ever look through. The automatic chronograph was not as easy to develop as you might think. There was a 3-way race to launch the first one in 1969 between Zenith's El Primero, Seiko SITS 139, and the Caliber 11 by a small handful of brands working together. Keep in mind that we've had perpetual calendar wristwatches for more than 50 years before that. Since 1969, nearly every brand has offered their version of the automatic chronograph. You can get quite granular about comparing power reserves or column wheel versus lever movements, but chances are you'll mainly choose based on size, price, and visual design. With that in mind, let's hit a few quick highlights before naming a debatable winner. The Zenith El Primero is a historic watch for being arguably the first automatic chronograph. There are conventionally beautiful versions like the 38mm Chronomaster and more adventurous versions like the Chronomaster Revival Shadow or the Rainbow Flyback. But the downside is that the caliber is essentially the same as it was in 1969. That would never happen with cars or tech equipment. And other competing calibers from 1969 have long been replaced by new and improved versions. A recent favorite is the TAG Heuer Glassbox Carrera debuting in 2023. It comes in that popular size of 39mm, and there are a lot of details to fall in love with here. You've got various textures, depths, angles, and finishes that add up to a lot of watch for the money. Compared to the El Primero, this takes that vintage watch spirit and adds modern advancements. And finally, our selection for the best all around is Omega, and there's plenty to choose from. The movements feature silicone hairsprings and a proprietary coaxial escapement for improved accuracy. Many of their movements are also master chronometer certified, which is more rigorous than the industry standard COSC certification. You can find these automatic Omega chronographs in the Speedmaster collection and beyond. Although, a word of warning, you may get some heat from other collectors for choosing an automatic Speedmaster over a manually wound version. Now for a category where there are not a lot of options, but one that is pretty perfect. We're talking about chronographs for smaller wrists. You have plenty of options for watches with a lug-to-lug of 47 and above, but very few for 46 and below. If you watched our size guide, you know that the most important measurements to keep in mind for sizing are lug-to-lug and thickness. That's because your wrist has more flexibility in diameter than it does from bone to bone. And you want to avoid that overhang that happens when a watch is too long from lug to lug. Thickness is also important to consider if you ever need to wear long sleeves. And it's especially important for chronographs because the extra functions require extra thickness, so it can add up rather quickly. We mentioned the Girard-Perregaux Richeville already with a 45mm lug to lug. For a more crowd-pleasing solution to this, try the TAG Heuer Carrera reissue, a mid-century inspired watch that stays true to mid-century sizing. It's based on the first Carrera reference, 2447N from 1964, and the two models to look out for here are the CS3110 and the CS3111. You also have the CS3113 from the early 2000s if you prefer outline subdials. These sport a manually wound Lamania 1873 movement and measure only 36mm wide by 44mm long and approximately 13mm thick, including the crystal. It's a classic watch that, thankfully for the smaller wristed among us, stays true to classic sizing as well. As always, if there's a watch I forgot to mention, shout it out in the comment. Hell, I might even buy it for myself. Next, selecting only one vintage chronograph is an impossible task. There's just so much history and so many brands to cover, even with a $10,000 cap. For TAG Heuer, you can go with the Carrera, the Camaro, the Octavia, or the Monaco. For Omega, you have the Speedmaster lineage, not to mention non-Speedmaster chronographs, with the famous Caliber 321. For Breitling, you have the Navitimer, the Chronomad, or the Premier. For Zenith, you have the El Primero. For Longines, you have the 30CH, or if you're really lucky, the 13ZN. Then you have the deeper cuts like the Gallet Multichron, or the Universal Genève Tricompacts. If my buddy Balaj were here, he'd tell you all about the world of Angulus chronographs and Excelsior Park movements, and that's the short list. With so many options to choose from, maybe it's best to try not to pick one favorite. Maybe we come at it from the angle of the most underrated vintage chronograph that offers a solid amount of value for money. And that leads us to Seiko. If you follow this channel, you know I won't shut up about the references 5717 and 5719. These are not the best vintage chronographs or the best Seiko chronographs, but they're important because they were the first Seiko chronographs. Created for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, they feature a monopusher chronograph combined with a rotating bezel. Not unlike the Rolex Zeograph for the nerds out there, they're also quite handsome and accessibly priced. However, what we're really here to talk about is the reference SITS 139. Remember, this is arguably the first automatic chronograph movement debuting in 1969, alongside the Zenith El Primo and the multi-brand Caliber 11. The 6139 also put Japan on the map as a serious watchmaking country. It's nicknamed the Pode because it spent 84 days in outer space on the wrist of astronaut William Pode between 1973 and 74. The yellow dial is the most recognizable variation, and you can pick these up for less than $1,000. Going with Seiko for the best vintage chronograph is a bit of a cop-out, but it's an easy and respectable way to get into the world of vintage chronographs. And once you have more spending power, you'll have a better idea of which vintage icon you want to pursue. Of course, if you disagree with this approach, drop your counter argument in a comment below. Our next category is the best oddball chronograph. And we're going to do a bit of a speed round for our 4 contenders because you're going to know right away whether you love them or hate them. Of course, we're saving the winner for last. First up is the Seiko Bullhead. This 1970s watch features a vertical day and date display, square subdials, and pump pushers on top of the case that resemble bullhorns. This watch is as funky as it is chunky. Next up is the Seiko Kinetic with a dial unlike anything else. This is perhaps the most divisive watch on the list, but it did win over comedian and automotive enthusiast Jay Leno. There are Bulgari Diagonal chronographs that are conventionally attractive and offer a lot of value for money. But we're here to talk about the Bulgari Diagonal Scuba chronograph. I love the bold 12 and 6 hour markers. I love the choice of handset, and I'm even learning to love the heavily scalloped bezel that's a signature of this model line. These watches are only 38 millimeters wide with a compact lug-to-lug, so they're easy to wear too. The winner is the Ebel 1911. The bezel and the bracelet are the elements that turn a lot of people away, but these offer a chance to score a high-frequency El Primero movement for considerably less than a Zenith. Some styles definitely feel dated, but once you give your eyes some time to adjust, they might be a little tempting. The argument over the best pilot's watch or best pilot's chronograph typically boils down to Breitling versus IWC, since these are the 2 companies that have built their histories and their reputations on aviation watches. However, one watch that often goes overlooked is the Breguet Type 20. We're not quite naming it the best pilot chronograph, but the Type 20 is steeped in 1950s French military history, with the modern remakes debuting in 1995. The watch features a self-winding caliber based on the Lemania 1350, but with an added flyback function. It's the most accessibly priced Breguet model and deserves more attention than it currently receives. IWC is synonymous with pilot watches, and their Top Gun chronographs are a solid collection of timepieces. The watches have a lot of legibility going for them, and the brand has pushed into new materials like ceratanium, a combination of ceramic and titanium that offers lightness, scratch resistance, and shows color exceptionally well. Also, these are not the best pilot chronographs, but we can't mention Top Gun without mentioning the very 1980s Porsche designed chronographs by Orfina. If you're gonna go for these, I say make Maverick proud and go for the blacked out PVD version. Okay, here it is. The watch edging out IWC for the top spot is the Breitling Navitimer. You have a huge range of examples to choose from, vintage and modern, and you can hone in on historic movements like the Venus 178 or the famed Valjoux 72, which was featured in early Rolex Daytonas. This is all for under $10,000. For bonus points, you can grab a reference 806 from the 1950s or 60s with the AOPA logo on it. This is where the Navitimer all began, with a collaboration between Breitling and the US Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And for even more bonus points, you can learn how the slide rule works. Hint, hint, it is not easy. Speaking of the Daytona, I've always loved the pre-Daytona reference 6238. And while researching for this video, I stumbled upon the Breitling Transocean AB0152. It's obviously not the same thing, but for only about $4,000, the dials of these both capture that mid-century charm that whispers instead of shouts. For the best chronograph under $1,000, I'm not afraid to throw in the Moon Swatch. Yes, it has its haters. Yes, it's essentially made of plastic. And yes, there's a new one coming out practically every day. But it's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's gotten support of even high-power collectors. It is not, however, our winner for this category. That Seiko 6139 can be found for under $1,000, but it's not our winner either. We're going to go modern for this selection because if you want to spend less than $1,000 on a watch, chances are you want to be sure you won't have to deal with a service anytime soon. The winner for the best chronograph under $1,000 is not one watch. Yes, we're cheating a bit, but the chronographs you find from micro brands offer the best value in today's market. You have metric quartz options from Furlan-Maury and Brew, and you have mechanical options from Baltic and Autodromo. These aren't the only micro brands making chronographs these days, but these are the ones that have proved to be crowd favorites. They're stylish, they're reliable, and they offer strong value for money. And if you really want to save a buck, you can often find them cheaper on the secondary market. You can find a surprising amount of luxury chronographs for under $5,000. I say surprising because offering a complicated, reliable, and beautifully designed watch at this price point is not always easy to do. There are multiple right answers for the best chronograph under $5,000, so please cast your vote in a comment. For today, let's look at two models that can perhaps be considered the most underrated, and they're from a brand you might not expect. The Tudor Big Block debuted in 1976 and featured an automatic chronograph caliber 12 years before the Rolex Daytona. This was the Valjoux 7750, which is quite beefy in size and solidity, contributing to the 14.5mm thick case profile. That thickness is where the name Big Block comes from. The watch features a quick set date, and to be fair, these typically sell for over $5,000, but can be found for under. For a similar watch that falls firmly within budget, consider the Tudor Heritage Chrono. It's based on the highly collectible Monte Carlo chronograph and carries the same DNA through its home plate hour markers and funky color scheme. You get the same build quality you'd expect from a Black Bay or Pelagos, and the watch features an ETA 2892 base movement with a Dubois-Duprat chronograph module. As an added bonus, you get 150 meters of water resistance, and you can turn the bezel to track a second time zone. Not bad, right? So, while there's a lot of competition for the best chronograph under $5,000, and perhaps no one right answer to that question, Tudor chronographs make a strong argument. For our final category, the best chronograph under $10,000, there is one right answer, and it will be a satisfying ending for most watch lovers. Notice how I said most, not all. $10,000 is a healthy budget for any watch, and there's one that blends history, design, and engineering better than any other. It is, of course, the Omega Speedmaster. The Speedmaster Professional sells for well under $10,000, and you get a lot of watch for the money. You can, of course, choose a vintage or limited edition Speedy if you have more to spend. The black dial, manually wound chronograph is for many what a watch should be. You already know it was the watch that went to the moon, and you already know there are more variations than you can count. Some say that everyone should own a Speedmaster at one point in their collecting journey. And while we don't know that that's true, we are confident that this is the best chronograph under $10,000. So, what's your favorite from the list, and what did I miss? I'm Thomas Hendricks with Chrono24. Thanks for watching.